True scary Craigslist horror stories. The Babysitter Scam. In 2014, a young college student named Ashley was looking for a part-time job to support her tuition fees. She found a babysitting gig on Craigslist that seemed perfect. A couple needed someone to watch their 2 kids for a few hours each week. The ad was written in a friendly tone, the pay was decent, and it seemed like an easy way to earn extra cash. Ashley responded to the ad, and within an hour, she received a response. The couple, who introduced themselves as Mike and Sarah, said they'd love to meet her and invited her over to their house the following evening. They provided a detailed address and everything seemed legitimate. The next day, she arrived at the house, a quiet suburban neighborhood on the outskirts of town. But something felt off. The house was eerily quiet for a place that was supposed to have 2 young children. When she rang the doorbell, a tall man answered. He said that his wife had taken the kids to a friend's house and that they were running late. Apologizing profusely, he invited Ashley inside to wait. Once inside, Ashley's unease grew. The house was sparsely furnished, and there were no signs that kids lived there, no toys, no photos, nothing that suggested a family at all. Mike offered her a drink, but she declined, becoming more and more uncomfortable by the minute. When he left the room to get something from the kitchen, she took the chance to leave. As she reached the front door, she heard a car pulling up and saw a woman, presumably Sarah, getting out. But there were no kids with her. Ashley quickly opened the door and bolted to her car. She didn't wait to find out what they had planned, but she knew in her gut that something was very wrong. When she later shared the story with friends, one of them suggested she report it to the police. Weeks later, she heard through the news that a similar Craigslist babysitting scam had been reported in another town. The couple lured young women to their home under false pretenses and never had any children. What their intentions were remains a mystery, but Ashley knew she had narrowly escaped something sinister. The Haunted Piano. In 2017, a young couple, Mark and Jessica, moved into a new house and decided to furnish it with items they found on Craigslist. One of their best finds was an antique grand piano. The seller claimed it was over 100 years old, with a rich history. Mark, being an amateur musician, was thrilled at the chance to own such a unique instrument for a bargain price. The seller seemed normal enough, though he was eager to get rid of the piano. When they asked why he was selling it, he became a bit cagey, muttering something about bad energy. Jessica brushed it off as someone just trying to upsell the piece, but the moment they'd brought the piano home, strange things started happening. At first, it was just small, unexplainable sounds. A key or two being struck in the middle of the night when no one was in the room. But as days passed, things escalated. Mark would come home from work to find the piano bench pulled out, though Jessica insisted she hadn't touched it. Jessica started having vivid nightmares about a man sitting at the piano, angrily playing dissonant chords. In her dreams, his face was always in shadow, but she could feel the malice emanating from him. Things took a terrifying turn when they began hearing music being played late at night. At first, it was just random notes, but soon it became clear that someone, or something, was playing a recognizable melody. The eerie part was that the music would start and stop as if someone was performing, yet the keys moved on their own. One evening, while Mark was practicing, the keys suddenly slammed down by themselves with enough force to splinter the wood. That was the final straw. They contacted a local psychic who claimed the piano was haunted by the spirit of its former owner, a troubled musician who had died by suicide after a failed career. She warned them that the spirit was growing stronger the more they interacted with the instrument. The couple immediately listed the piano back on Craigslist, desperate to rid themselves of it. When a new buyer came to pick it up, Mark and Jessica didn't mention the hauntings. To this day, they wonder if they condemned someone else to suffer at the hands of the angry spirit attached to the piano. The roommate from hell. Craig needed a roommate fast. His rent had just gone up, and without another person to split the bills, he knew he couldn't afford to keep his apartment. Desperate, he posted an ad on Craigslist, hoping to find someone trustworthy. A guy named Nick responded almost immediately. He seemed normal, friendly, employed, and eager to move in quickly. Craig met him in person, and though something felt a little off, Craig chalked it up to nerves. After all, Nick seemed like a perfectly decent guy. Within days of moving in, though, things took a dark turn. Nick never unpacked any boxes, keeping most of his belongings locked in his room. He would disappear for long stretches of time, sometimes not coming home for days, and when he did, he was often agitated, pacing the apartment at all hours of the night. Then Craig started noticing things going missing. At first, it was small stuff, snacks from the fridge, a missing DVD, but it soon escalated. One evening, Craig returned home to find his bedroom door ajar, something he knew he had locked. Inside, his drawers were ransacked, and his wallet was missing. He confronted Nick, but Nick denied everything, growing defensive and erratic. As the weeks went on, Craig grew more and more uncomfortable. He started hearing strange noises from Nick's room, muffled voices, footsteps pacing back and forth even when Nick wasn't home. One night, Craig woke up to the feeling of someone watching him. He opened his eyes and saw Nick standing in his doorway, just staring. When Craig demanded to know what he was doing, Nick smiled eerily and said, "Just making sure you're safe." The next morning, Craig knew he had to get out. He packed his things and left without saying a word, staying with a friend while he found a new place. After he moved out, Craig did some digging and discovered that Nick had a history of mental illness and had been evicted multiple times for harassing former roommates. To this day, Craig wonders if he narrowly avoided something much worse: the deadly job offer. In 2011, a man named Richard Beasley posted an ad on Craigslist offering a farm job in rural Ohio. The ad promised good pay, free housing, and plenty of land for someone looking for a quiet life. 3 men, all in need of steady work, responded to the ad, each disappearing shortly after meeting with Beasley for an interview. One of the men, Scott Davis, was lucky enough to escape with his life. After being lured to a secluded property, he was ambushed and shot. But despite his injuries, Scott managed to flee into the woods and eventually flagged down help. His testimony led to the arrest of Richard Beasley and his accomplice, a 16-year-old boy named Brogan Rafferty. The investigation revealed that Beasley had been using Craigslist to lure men to their deaths in an attempt to steal their identities and belongings. By the time he was caught, he had already murdered 3 men. Beasley was sentenced to death, but the horrifying legacy of his Craigslist killings continues to haunt those who remember the case. The free couch trap. In 2015, a young couple named Rachel and Thomas were setting up their first apartment together. Money was tight, so they turned to Craigslist to find affordable furniture. One day, they stumbled across an ad for a free leather couch. The pictures looked amazing, and the post said the owners were giving it away because they were moving out of state. It seemed too good to pass up. They contacted the person behind the ad, and the couple agreed to meet the seller at his house to pick up the couch. When they arrived, the neighborhood was a little rundown, but Rachel and Thomas figured it was just part of the deal for getting something free. A man opened the door, and although he looked rough around the edges, he invited them in to see the couch. Once inside, things immediately felt wrong. The house was filthy, cluttered with garbage and broken furniture, yet there was no couch in sight. The man, now seeming jittery, said it was in the basement. Every instinct screamed at Rachel to leave, but Thomas hesitated. The man kept insisting they come downstairs to see it. Thomas took a step toward the basement, but Rachel grabbed his arm and whispered that they needed to leave. Before the man could react, they hurried out of the house and back to their car. As they sped away, Rachel spotted another man watching them from the side of the house, partially hidden in the shadows. They realized that the free couch was likely a lure for something much darker. The thought of what could have happened if they had gone into the basement still sends chills down their spines. The Organ Harvester urban legend. This story dates back to 2010 when a man named Mark from Denver responded to a Craigslist ad offering quick cash for participation in a medical study. Desperate for money, Mark jumped at the opportunity, not questioning the details too much. The ad seemed legit, and when he spoke with the doctor over the phone, everything sounded professional. Mark was instructed to come to a private residence rather than a hospital or clinic, but the man on the phone reassured him, saying the initial consultation would just be a formality before the study. The next day, Mark arrived at the address provided and was greeted by a man in a lab coat. The home was set up with medical equipment, and the man claimed they were preparing for an in-home study due to a lack of available clinical space. Mark was offered a drink, and within minutes of consuming it, he started feeling dizzy and disoriented. Before he knew it, he blacked out. Hours later, he woke up in a bathtub filled with ice, with a note taped to his chest. The note instructed him to call 911 immediately or he would die. Mark managed to reach his phone and call for help. When the paramedics arrived, they discovered that one of his kidneys had been surgically removed. This urban legend about Craigslist organ harvesting has been circulated widely, and while there are no confirmed cases directly tied to Craigslist, it continues to serve as a chilling reminder of the potential dangers lurking online. Though the truth of Mark's story is disputed, it has become a part of the modern-day folklore surrounding Craigslist horror stories. The Killer Photographer. In 2013, a young woman named Lindsay, an aspiring model, was scrolling through Craigslist looking for photography gigs. She found an ad posted by a photographer looking for models for a vintage-themed photo shoot. The pay was decent, and the photographer's portfolio, linked in the ad, looked professional. Lindsay, excited by the opportunity, quickly responded to the post. The photographer, who introduced himself as David, responded within an hour and said he loved Lindsay's look and wanted to book her for the shoot. He provided an address for the shoot location, which was a house in a rural area just outside of town. Lindsay thought it was a bit odd to shoot in such an isolated spot, but David assured her it was a perfect setting for the vintage theme. On the day of the shoot, Lindsay arrived at the house and noticed it was eerily quiet. She knocked on the door, and David answered, camera in hand, ready to start. He was polite, if a bit distant, but as the session went on, his demeanor became unsettling. He began giving her odd directions, telling her to act scared and look like you're being chased. Lindsay laughed nervously but followed along, feeling more and more uncomfortable. When David told her to go inside the house for the next set of photos, her stomach dropped. The house had a dark, unsettling vibe, and she realized that no one else was there. No makeup artist, no lighting crew, just her and David. She tried to excuse herself, saying she wasn't feeling well, but David insisted they finish the shoot. At that moment, she heard a noise from another room. David seemed unfazed, but Lindsay's heart raced. She quickly gathered her things and made an excuse to leave, refusing to go back inside. David became agitated, but Lindsay managed to get to her car and drive off. Later that evening, she tried looking up David's portfolio again, only to find that the website was gone. The photographer had vanished, leaving no trace of the legitimate business he had claimed to run. Weeks later, Lindsay read about a Craigslist killer who had been targeting young women in her area, using the guise of photography gigs to lure them in. She was shaken to the core, realizing how close she had come to becoming one of his victims. The room for rent nightmare. In 2018, Monica, a recent college graduate, was looking for a cheap place to live while she started her first full-time job. She found a Craigslist ad for a room in a house shared by 3 other women. The rent was unbelievably affordable, and the pictures of the house looked perfect. The other roommates seemed friendly when Monica met them for the first time, and she quickly decided to move in. However, shortly after settling into her new home, strange things started happening. Monica would hear whispering outside her room late at night, but when she checked, no one was there. Items in her room began disappearing and reappearing in odd places, like her toothbrush ending up in the kitchen, or her keys left in the living room when she was sure she had left them in her purse. One night, Monica woke up to find one of her roommates standing in her doorway, just staring at her. When Monica confronted her, the woman said she was sleepwalking and quickly left. But it happened again the next night, and Monica began to suspect something was seriously wrong. She started locking her bedroom door at night, but the strange behavior continued. The roommates became increasingly distant, barely speaking to her, and often huddling together in hushed conversations when she was around. One evening, after returning home from work, Monica overheard them discussing her in low voices. She couldn't make out everything, but what she did hear terrified her. They mentioned finishing it soon and getting rid of her. Panicked, Monica packed her things and left that night, staying with a friend until she could find a new place to live. After moving out, she did some digging and discovered that the house had a history of strange disappearances. Several former tenants had gone missing under mysterious circumstances, and it was rumored that the roommates were part of some bizarre cult. Monica is thankful every day that she trusted her instincts and got out when she did. The Craigslist Cannibal. One of the most disturbing Craigslist stories comes from a man named John who thought he was simply selling an old refrigerator to a guy named Steve. The transaction seemed straightforward enough. Steve messaged John on Craigslist expressing interest in buying the fridge for his garage. After a few back-and-forth emails, they agreed on a price and a time for Steve to come over and pick it up. When Steve arrived at John's house, things took a bizarre turn. At first, Steve seemed friendly and talkative, but his questions started getting odd. He asked John if he lived alone and if he had family nearby, but brushed off these questions as part of casual conversation. While they were loading the fridge into Steve's truck, Steve said something that sent a chill down John's spine. This fridge would be perfect for storing bodies. John laughed it off, thinking it was a morbid joke, but Steve wasn't smiling. After the sale, John couldn't shake the eerie feeling. A few weeks later, he stumbled across an article about a man named Steve who had been arrested for cannibalism. The article showed the mugshot of the very man who had bought John's refrigerator. Steve had been using Craigslist to lure victims into his home, where he carried out unspeakable acts. John realized he had unknowingly sold a refrigerator to someone who had likely planned to use it for far more sinister purposes. The murderous roommate. In 2017, college student Samantha was looking for a roommate to share her apartment after her old roommate moved out. She posted an ad on Craigslist, and within a few days, she received a reply from a man named Alex. Alex seemed normal enough, a young professional who was new to the city and needed a place to stay. He came across as polite and friendly during their initial email exchange, so Samantha decided to meet him for coffee to see if they would be a good fit as roommates. Alex seemed like a decent guy in person, so Samantha offered him the room. He moved in a week later, and things seemed fine at first. But soon after moving in, Alex's behavior started to change. He would often stay up late, wandering around the apartment and staring at Samantha without saying a word. He rarely left his room during the day and frequently made odd, cryptic remarks about death and the afterlife. One night, Samantha woke up to the sound of Alex standing outside her bedroom door, whispering to himself. She called out to him, but he didn't respond. Instead, he continued mumbling in a low, eerie voice, pacing back and forth in the hallway. Samantha locked her door, terrified, and stayed awake the rest of the night. The next morning, she called a friend for advice and decided it was time to ask Alex to leave. When she confronted him, he became angry and hostile, but he agreed to leave by the end of the week. However, that night, Samantha woke up to the sound of her door being jiggled. She immediately called the police. When the authorities arrived, they found Alex hiding in the closet with a knife. He had planned to attack Samantha in her sleep. It turned out Alex had a long history of violent behavior and had been using Craigslist to find his next victim. Samantha narrowly escaped with her life, and Alex was arrested and charged with attempted murder. The job that wasn't. In 2010, 19-year-old Brian found himself in desperate need of a job. After scouring Craigslist, he came across a job listing that seemed perfect. A local farm was hiring a farmhand to help with daily chores and upkeep. The pay was good, and it offered room and board. Brian thought it sounded like an ideal way to escape his financial struggles, so he quickly applied. The man who placed the ad, Jack, responded almost immediately, saying he needed someone right away. Jack seemed friendly and professional over the phone, so Brian made arrangements to drive out to the farm, which was located in a remote area. When he arrived, the farm looked run down, with broken fences and overgrown fields. Jack greeted him at the gate and led him inside the house, explaining that they were in the middle of a big renovation and needed help cleaning up the property. The first day seemed normal enough. Brian worked around the farm, hauling debris and fixing fences. But as the days went on, Jack's behavior became erratic. He would frequently disappear for hours at a time, leaving Brian alone at the farm. Worse, Brian started hearing strange noises coming from the barn late at night, sounds like chains rattling and muffled screams. One night, after hearing the unsettling noises again, Brian decided to investigate the barn. What he found inside was horrifying. The barn was full of strange, makeshift cages and blood-stained tools. Brian realized that Jack had been holding people captive there, possibly torturing them. Panicked, Brian fled the property and drove straight to the nearest police station. After investigating the farm, the authorities discovered that Jack had been luring vulnerable people to his property under the guise of a job offer, only to imprison and abuse them. Brian was one of the few lucky ones to escape. Jack was arrested and later convicted of multiple counts of kidnapping and torture. The Craigslist car deal gone wrong. In 2019, a man named Greg found himself in need of a new car after his old one broke down. He decided to browse Craigslist, where he found a 2016 Ford Mustang listed at a ridiculously low price. The seller, who identified himself as Josh, explained that he was moving out of state and needed to sell the car quickly. Josh sent pictures of the car, and everything seemed to check out. Eager to make the deal, Greg arranged to meet Josh in person. Josh told Greg that he'd bring the car to a parking lot in a nearby city where they could finalize the deal. When Greg arrived at the meeting spot, Josh was waiting with the car, just as promised. After a brief chat, Greg handed over the cash, and Josh handed over the keys and title. Everything seemed to be going smoothly. Greg drove the Mustang home, thrilled with his new car. But just 2 days later, he was pulled over by the police. They informed him that the car had been reported stolen and that he had unknowingly purchased a stolen vehicle. Greg was shocked. The title Josh had given him was fake, and the license plates had been swapped. Josh had been running a scam, using Craigslist to sell stolen cars to unsuspecting buyers. Despite having all of Josh's contact information from their deal, Greg soon discovered that everything had been faked. Josh's phone number, email address, and even the name he had used were all bogus. Greg lost thousands of dollars in the deal, and although the police launched an investigation, Josh was never caught. The Craigslist Killer. One of the most infamous cases of Craigslist horror is the story of Philip Markoff, dubbed the Craigslist Killer. In 2009, Markoff, a medical student with a seemingly promising future, used Craigslist to lure victims by responding to ads in the erotic services section. His preferred targets were women offering private massages. On April 14, 2009, Markoff lured Julissa Brisman to a hotel in Boston after she posted an ad on Craigslist for erotic services. Once inside her room, he attempted to restrain her and steal her belongings. When she resisted, he shot and killed her. The investigation revealed that this was not an isolated incident. Markoff had been attacking women across the region, luring them into hotels through Craigslist ads and robbing them at gunpoint. It wasn't long before Markoff's luck ran out. Surveillance cameras caught him entering and leaving the crime scenes, and authorities were able to trace his online activity, ultimately leading to his arrest. While awaiting trial, Markoff took his own life in jail. His case shocked the nation and cast a dark shadow over the potential dangers of Craigslist, proving that even seemingly normal people could have hidden deadly intentions. The free boat nightmare. In 2016, a man named Mike was browsing Craigslist for a new boat when he came across a strange but enticing offer. The ad simply said, "Free boat, must pick up today." Mike had been searching for a boat for months, and the idea of getting one for free sounded too good to pass up. He quickly contacted the seller and arranged to meet him in a secluded area by the river. When Mike arrived, the boat was there, but it was much older and more dilapidated than it had appeared in the photos. The seller, a gruff man named Paul, seemed impatient and eager to get rid of the boat as quickly as possible. Mike was hesitant but decided to take it. Paul helped him load the boat onto a trailer and quickly left without much conversation. As Mike was inspecting the boat later that night, he noticed something strange. A heavy, foul smell coming from inside one of the storage compartments. When he pried it open, he was horrified to discover a large, blood-stained tarp and several trash bags filled with what looked like human remains. Terrified, he called the police. After a thorough investigation, the police discovered that Paul had been using the boat to dispose of bodies. He had been running a scheme for months, using Craigslist to get rid of his boat after each use, knowing that the new owners would likely never uncover his horrifying secret. Mike narrowly avoided becoming part of a much darker story. Authorities eventually arrested Paul, and he was charged with multiple counts of murder. The dog adoption trap. In 2014, a young woman named Sarah was looking to adopt a dog after her beloved Labrador passed away. She turned to Craigslist, where she found a heartwarming ad about a dog named Max who needed a new home. The post was filled with loving descriptions of Max's gentle nature and included several adorable pictures. The owners claimed they were moving to a place that didn't allow pets and wanted to find Max a good home. Excited, Sarah reached out and arranged to meet the owners at their house to see Max in person. The couple seemed kind and welcoming over the phone, and Sarah thought she had found the perfect new pet. When she arrived at their house, the man and woman greeted her with Max, who appeared to be a friendly, well-behaved dog. They invited Sarah inside to chat and get to know the dog better. Once inside, however, Sarah immediately sensed something was wrong. The couple became more insistent, asking invasive questions about her life and finances. The conversation took a dark turn when they started talking about making sacrifices and how their previous dog didn't work out. At that point, Sarah's gut told her something was horribly off, so she made an excuse to leave. As she reached the door, the man blocked her path and a woman stood behind him, asking if she was sure she didn't want to stay longer. Terrified, Sarah pushed past them and ran out of the house. Once she was safely in her car, she reported the incident to the police. It turns out that the couple had been using the promise of dog adoption as a lure to get people into their home for reasons that remain unclear. Several other people had come forward after similar experiences, though fortunately, no one had been physically harmed. Sarah later found out that Max wasn't even their dog. The couple had been borrowing him from a neighbor to make their trap seem more believable. The creepy casket seller. In 2019, a man named Adam was browsing Craigslist for unique furniture when he came across a peculiar ad. Genuine antique casket for sale. Perfect for Halloween decor. The casket was beautifully ornate with intricate carvings, and it was being sold at a shockingly low price. Adam thought it would make the perfect centerpiece for his upcoming Halloween party, so he contacted the seller and arranged to meet him. The seller, a man named Joe, lived out in the countryside. When Adam arrived, he was greeted by Joe, who seemed friendly but a little eccentric. Joe led Adam to a small barn where the casket was stored. The barn was dimly lit and filled with strange, macabre items, old mannequins, broken dolls, and what looked like medical equipment from another century. Adam felt uneasy but was determined to get the casket for his party. Joe told Adam that the casket had been passed down in his family for generations and was used in traditional ceremonies. When Adam asked what kind of ceremonies, Joe just smiled and said, "The kind you don't forget." Brushing off the odd comment, Adam paid for the casket and loaded it into his truck. That night, Adam began having strange, vivid nightmares. He dreamed of being trapped inside the casket, unable to breathe as voices chanted around him. He woke up in a cold sweat, but the next night, the same nightmare returned, even more intense. After a week of these terrifying dreams, Adam decided to return the casket to Joe. When he arrived at Joe's property, the barn was gone, completely demolished. A neighbor told Adam that Joe had been arrested a few days earlier for practicing illegal occult rituals. The casket was believed to have been used in sacrificial rites, and Joe had been selling it to unsuspecting buyers in hopes of passing the curse onto them. Horrified, Adam left the casket with the authorities, who warned him never to return. The moving scam. In 2015, a man named Tim responded to a Craigslist ad for moving services. He had just bought a house and needed help transporting his belongings across town. The company, which called itself Fast Movers, advertised incredibly low rates and promised professional service. After speaking with the owner, Tim scheduled the movers to arrive the following week. The movers showed up right on time, 2 men in an unmarked truck. They seemed polite and efficient, loading Tim's furniture and boxes into the truck in record time. Tim followed them to his new house, but halfway there, the truck took a different route. When he tried to call the movers, their phone went straight to voicemail. Panicking, Tim followed the truck at a distance but soon lost sight of it. Hours later, the movers never showed up at his new house, and all of Tim's belongings were gone. He tried contacting the company, but their Craigslist ad had been taken down, and the phone number was disconnected. Tim reported the incident to the police, but it was too late. The thieves had disappeared with everything Tim owned, from furniture to sentimental keepsakes. The authorities later discovered that the Fast Movers scam was a well-organized scheme. The thieves would place ads on Craigslist, posing as moving companies, only to steal their clients' belongings and vanish. Tim was just one of many victims who lost everything to these professional con artists. Despite a thorough investigation, the criminals were never caught, and Tim never recovered his belongings. The Craigslist job interview nightmare. In 2013, a man named Andrew was looking for work after being laid off from his job. He turned to Craigslist, where he found an ad for a position as a security guard at a warehouse on the outskirts of town. The pay was decent, and the job description seemed simple enough, so Andrew sent in his application. A day later, he received an email from the manager of the warehouse, who said they were eager to meet with him and scheduled an interview for the next morning. The warehouse was located in a remote area far from the city. When Andrew arrived, there were no other cars in the parking lot, and the building looked deserted. Feeling uneasy, he called the manager to confirm the interview, and the man on the other end of the phone reassured him that they were inside and waiting for him. Andrew entered the warehouse, and immediately the heavy steel door slammed shut behind him. The place was dimly lit and completely empty. There were no signs of any business or employees. As Andrew called out, his voice echoed in the vast, hollow space. Suddenly, he heard footsteps approaching from the darkness, and a deep, unfamiliar voice asked, "Looking for work?" Panicked, Andrew tried to find an exit, but the door was locked. He turned to see a tall man in a mask slowly walking toward him. In a rush of adrenaline, Andrew found a back door and managed to escape before the man could catch him. He ran to his car and drove straight to the police station. Later, Andrew found out that this job interview was part of a trap. The man had posted fake job ads to lure people into isolated locations where he would rob or assault them. The police investigated the incident but were unable to track down the suspect. Andrew narrowly escaped a horrifying fate, and to this day, the memory of that empty warehouse haunts him. The Craigslist rental scam. In 2018, Jessica and her fiancé Matt were looking for a new place to live. They came across a beautiful house listed for rent on Craigslist, complete with photos of a cozy, fully furnished home. The price was much lower than other rentals in the area, which caught their attention. They contacted the landlord, who explained that he had moved out of state for work and needed to rent the house quickly. He said he couldn't meet them in person, but provided a detailed lease agreement and requested a deposit to secure the rental. Excited about the prospect of moving into such a nice home at a great price, Jessica and Matt wired the money for the deposit. The landlord promised to mail the keys once the payment cleared. Days passed, and the couple grew anxious when they didn't receive the keys. When they tried to contact the landlord, he stopped responding. Frustrated, they decided to drive to the house themselves. When they arrived, they were shocked to find another family living there. The homeowners had never listed the house for rent and were unaware of the Craigslist ad. Jessica and Matt realized they had fallen victim to a rental scam. The scammer had stolen photos of the house from a real estate listing and used them to create a fake rental ad. They reported the scam to the authorities, but the money they had sent was gone, and the scammer was never caught. Jessica and Matt not only lost thousands of dollars, but also had to scramble to find another place to live. The experience left them feeling violated and distrustful of online listings, serving as a painful reminder of how easily people can be manipulated by sophisticated Craigslist scams. The Craigslist creepy neighbor. In 2017, a woman named Lisa was looking for a new roommate after her previous one moved out. She posted an ad on Craigslist, and within a few days, she got a response from a woman named Claire. Claire seemed friendly and down to earth, and after a few emails, Lisa invited her over to check out the apartment. When Claire arrived, she was even nicer in person, and Lisa felt like they would be a good fit. Claire agreed to move in the following week. For the first few days, things were great. Claire was quiet, clean, and respectful. However, Lisa began to notice odd behavior from her new roommate. Claire would disappear for hours, sometimes in the middle of the night, and return with strange packages that she refused to explain. One night, Lisa woke up to the sound of whispers outside her bedroom door. She cautiously got up and opened the door to find Claire standing there, staring at her. Claire claimed she was just checking to make sure Lisa was okay. Unsettled, Lisa brushed it off as a misunderstanding, but the strange behavior continued. A few days later, Lisa overheard Claire talking to someone in her room, but when she knocked on the door, Claire was alone. Claire dismissed it, saying she was talking on the phone, but Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. One evening, while Lisa was at work, a neighbor knocked on her door. He asked if Lisa's new roommate had moved in yet, explaining that he had seen Claire hanging around the building before she responded to the Craigslist ad. The neighbor had caught Claire snooping around Lisa's mailbox and peering into her windows late at night. Terrified, Lisa confronted Claire, who became defensive and aggressive, denying everything. Lisa asked her to move out, and after a heated argument, Claire packed her things and left. Lisa later found out that Claire had a history of stalking people she met through Craigslist ads, moving into their homes to gather personal information and spy on them. Lisa's neighbor had saved her from a dangerous situation just in time. The Craigslist date that turned deadly. In 2014, a woman named Emily decided to try online dating and came across a personal ad on Craigslist from a man named Mark. He seemed charming and respectful in his messages, so after exchanging a few emails, they arranged to meet for coffee. The first date went well, and Emily found herself attracted to Mark's easygoing personality and sense of humor. Over the next few weeks, they continued to see each other, and Mark seemed like the perfect gentleman. However, Emily noticed some red flags. He was overly possessive, constantly texting her, and demanding to know where she was at all times. One night, after Emily ignored his calls, Mark showed up at her apartment unannounced. Though shaken by his behavior, Emily dismissed it as a one-time incident. But things escalated quickly. Mark began following Emily to work, showing up at her friends' houses, and confronting her when she didn't answer his texts. Realizing that Mark was becoming increasingly unstable, Emily broke off the relationship. Furious, Mark began stalking her relentlessly. He would send her threatening messages, leave creepy notes on her car, and even hacked into her social media accounts. Emily reported him to the police, but Mark managed to evade arrest by constantly changing his phone number and using fake identities. One night, Mark broke into Emily's apartment. Fortunately, she wasn't home, but when she returned, she found her place ransacked. A chilling note was left on her bed that read, "You can't hide from me." Emily immediately called the police, who finally managed to track Mark down. He was arrested and charged with stalking and breaking and entering. Emily later found out that Mark had a history of violence and had been using Craigslist to find victims, manipulating them into relationships before terrorizing them. Though she narrowly escaped physical harm, the psychological trauma of being stalked by Mark still haunts her to this day. The Craigslist fake concert tickets. In 2019, a group of friends from Chicago was excited to attend a major music festival that had been sold out for months. Determined not to miss out, they scoured Craigslist for tickets, hoping to find a last-minute deal. They came across an ad from a man named Dave, who claimed he had 3 extra tickets because his friends couldn't make it. Dave offered the tickets at face value, and after exchanging a few texts, the friends agreed to meet him in a public place to make the exchange. When they arrived, Dave seemed friendly and genuine. He handed them the tickets, and they paid him in cash. Everything seemed fine until they arrived at the festival gates. When they handed over their tickets, the security guard scanned them and informed the group that the tickets were fake. Confused and angry, they tried to contact Dave, but his phone number had been disconnected. Realizing they had been scammed, they reported the incident to the festival staff and the police, but there was little they could do. The friends not only missed out on the festival, but were also out hundreds of dollars. They later found out that Dave had been running the same scam on Craigslist for months, selling fake tickets to concerts and events all over the city. Despite the police investigating the case, Dave was never caught. The friends learned a hard lesson about the risks of buying anything on Craigslist without verifying its legitimacy. The Craigslist pet sitter nightmare. In 2015, a young couple, Karen and Ben, was preparing to go on vacation for a week and needed someone to watch their beloved golden retriever, Max. They found a pet-sitting ad on Craigslist that seemed trustworthy. The woman, named Emily, claimed to be an experienced pet sitter who had worked with several families in the area. Her ad included glowing testimonials from previous clients, and her rates were reasonable. After a brief phone interview, Karen and Ben felt comfortable enough to hire Emily to stay at their house and care for Max while they were away. Everything seemed fine during their vacation. Emily sent regular updates, including pictures of Max playing in the yard. However, when Karen and Ben returned home, they found their house in a state of chaos. The kitchen cabinets were open, drawers were emptied, and items were missing. But the most disturbing discovery was Max himself. He was locked in a small room, shaking and scared. Karen and Ben immediately tried to contact Emily, but her phone number was disconnected. They quickly realized they had been scammed. Not only had Emily robbed their home, but she had also mistreated their dog. After filing a police report, they learned that Emily had used a fake identity. She had been posing as a pet sitter on Craigslist for months, targeting families who would be away for extended periods, stealing from them, and leaving their pets in terrible conditions. The couple was heartbroken, and although Max eventually recovered from the ordeal, the trauma of the experience lingered for years. The Craigslist House of Horrors. In 2016, Lisa, a college student, was looking for off-campus housing and found a cheap listing for a room in a large house on Craigslist. The ad was enticing: spacious room, low rent, and only 2 other roommates. The landlord, an older man named Tom, claimed he was looking for someone quiet and responsible to share the house. Lisa arranged to meet Tom and tour the place. When she arrived at the house, Tom was friendly and welcoming, but something felt off. The house was much darker and more rundown than it appeared in the pictures. Still, the rent was so cheap that Lisa was willing to overlook the red flags. Tom showed her around the house, and the other 2 supposed roommates were nowhere to be seen. He explained that they were out for the day, but Lisa noticed several locked doors that Tom refused to open. Despite her reservations, Lisa decided to move in, thinking that her first impressions might have been wrong. Within a few days, however, strange things started happening. She would hear scratching noises coming from behind the locked doors at night, and sometimes she would wake up to find her bedroom door slightly ajar, even though she had locked it before bed. Tom would make excuses whenever she asked about the other roommates, and the atmosphere in the house grew increasingly uncomfortable. One night, Lisa heard muffled screams coming from one of the locked rooms. Terrified, she called the police, who arrived and broke into the rooms. What they found was horrifying. Tom had been holding 2 women captive for months, drugging and abusing them. The so-called roommates were actually prisoners. Tom had been using Craigslist to lure unsuspecting tenants into his house, where he had complete control. Lisa had narrowly escaped becoming his next victim, and the story made national news as one of the most chilling Craigslist cases to date. The Craigslist couch scammer. In 2018, a man named Matt was looking for a used couch to furnish his new apartment. He found an ad on Craigslist offering a modern, barely used sectional for an extremely low price. The seller, a woman named Jessica, claimed she was moving out of the country and needed to get rid of the couch quickly. Matt was thrilled at the prospect of getting such a great deal, so he contacted Jessica and arranged to pick up the couch that weekend. When Matt arrived at Jessica's apartment, things seemed legitimate. The couch was exactly as described, and Jessica was friendly and personable. She even helped Matt load the couch into his truck. He paid her in cash, and everything seemed above board. But when Matt got the couch home and started inspecting it more closely, he noticed something odd. There were several small tears and holes in the fabric that hadn't been visible before. Thinking it was just normal wear and tear, he didn't think much of it until later that evening. As he sat on the couch watching TV, Matt started feeling itchy and uncomfortable. He brushed it off as nothing, but over the next few days, the itching became unbearable. After some investigation, he discovered that the couch was infested with bed bugs. Horrified, Matt contacted Jessica to confront her, but she had blocked his number. He tried to track her down, but the apartment where he had picked up the couch was actually a short-term rental, and Jessica had moved out. Matt ended up having to throw out the couch and spend hundreds of dollars on an exterminator to rid his apartment of the bed bugs. He later learned that Jessica had been running the same scam on multiple people, selling infested furniture under fake names and moving from one temporary rental to another. Despite filing a police report, Matt never got his money back, and Jessica was never caught. The Craigslist moving horror. In 2019, a woman named Samantha hired a moving company she found on Craigslist to help her relocate to a new city. The movers, who called themselves Elite Movers, offered a significantly lower rate than other companies, and their reviews on Craigslist were glowing. Samantha thought she had found a great deal, so she booked them for her move. On the day of the move, 2 men showed up in an unmarked truck. They seemed friendly enough, and they quickly loaded Samantha's belongings into the truck. However, once everything was packed up, they told Samantha that there was an extra fee for the mileage and that the price she was quoted wouldn't cover the full cost of the move. They demanded an additional $500 in cash before they would drive to her new address. Samantha was shocked but felt like she had no choice but to pay them. She handed over the money, and the movers promised to meet her at her new place later that afternoon. However, when she arrived, the truck was nowhere to be found. Hours passed, and the movers didn't show up. Frantic, Samantha tried calling the number they had given her, but it was disconnected. It was then that Samantha realized she had been scammed. The movers had taken all of her belongings and disappeared. She immediately reported the incident to the police, but the scammers had vanished, leaving no trace behind. Samantha lost nearly everything she owned, from furniture to personal items with sentimental value. She later learned that this moving scam had been happening across multiple cities, with Craigslist being used to lure victims in with low prices and false promises. The Craigslist handyman from hell. In 2014, a couple named Greg and Melissa was renovating their home and needed some help with the plumbing. They found a Craigslist ad from a handyman named John, who claimed to have years of experience and offered his services at a low price. Greg and Melissa contacted John, and he seemed professional on the phone, even providing references for past clients. John arrived the next day and started working on the plumbing. Everything seemed fine at first, but soon the couple began noticing issues. The plumbing work wasn't up to code, and John was constantly leaving the house in the middle of the job to grab supplies. Greg and Melissa became suspicious when John started asking for more money, claiming that the job was more complicated than he initially thought. One day, while John was supposedly out getting supplies, Greg decided to check the work in progress. To his horror, he found that John hadn't been doing any real work. He had simply been ripping out pipes and leaving the plumbing in worse shape than before. Greg tried calling John, but his number was disconnected. The couple later discovered that John had been using a fake name and had scammed multiple homeowners across the city by taking their money and leaving their houses in ruins. Greg and Melissa were forced to hire a licensed plumber to fix the damage John had caused, costing them thousands of dollars. They reported the scam to Craigslist and the police, but John was never found. The experience left them feeling betrayed and wary of ever using Craigslist to find contractors again. The Craigslist free piano horror. In 2017, a man named David stumbled upon a Craigslist ad offering a free piano. The ad described it as an old, but well-maintained grand piano. The only catch was that it needed to be picked up quickly due to the owner moving out of state. David, a music enthusiast, saw it as the opportunity of a lifetime to get an expensive instrument for free. He immediately contacted the seller, a man named Martin, who seemed polite and friendly on the phone. Martin explained that the piano was in his basement and would need to be moved by professionals, but assured David it was in great condition. Eager, David hired a moving company and arranged a time to pick up the piano. When he arrived at the address, the house was old and somewhat run down, but nothing too unusual. Martin greeted David at the door, leading him and the movers down into the basement where the piano was kept. However, as soon as they entered the dimly lit basement, something felt off. The air was thick with a musty smell, and the piano, though beautiful, was covered in a layer of dust as if it hadn't been touched in years. Still, David decided to proceed. As the movers were preparing to lift the piano, Martin became increasingly anxious, pacing around and muttering under his breath. Then, out of nowhere, he blurted, someone died down here playing that piano." The movers and David stopped in their tracks, unsure of how to respond. Martin went on to explain that the previous owner, his brother, had died suddenly while playing a song late at night. Creeped out but still focused on the prize, David brushed off the story and continued with the move. The piano was transported to his house without incident, and for a while, everything seemed normal. However, after a few weeks, strange things began happening. David would hear faint piano music playing in the middle of the night, even though the piano wasn't being used. He chalked it up to his imagination, but the incidents became more frequent and eerie. One night, David was jolted awake by the unmistakable sound of someone playing the piano in his living room. He rushed downstairs, but the room was empty. The piano keys, however, were still moving, playing the same haunting melody Martin had mentioned his brother played before his death. Terrified, David contacted a medium who claimed that the piano was cursed and that its previous owner's spirit was attached to it. Desperate to rid himself of the piano, David posted it back on Craigslist for free. He never mentioned the strange occurrences and quickly found someone willing to take it. Since then, he hasn't had any more paranormal experiences, but the memory of that eerie piano still haunts him. The Craigslist Hitman. In 2013, a woman named Jennifer was going through a bitter divorce. After months of turmoil, she came across an ad on Craigslist that seemed shockingly out of place. The ad was titled "Problem Solved" and was incredibly vague, but it mentioned dealing with difficult people and removing issues permanently. Out of curiosity, Jennifer contacted the poster. The man who responded introduced himself as Dave and explained that he was offering problem-solving services, making it clear that he was talking about carrying out hits for money. Horrified, Jennifer immediately stopped communicating with him, but the story doesn't end there. Several weeks later, Jennifer noticed a strange car parked near her house. It would appear at odd times, always with a man inside who never got out. One evening, she received a chilling message from Dave. He warned her not to back out of their deal and claimed that someone was keeping an eye on her. Panic set in as Jennifer realized Dave was stalking her, likely hoping she would change her mind about the hit. Fearing for her life, she contacted the police. An investigation revealed that Dave had been running a twisted scam through Craigslist, offering hitman services and then extorting people who responded, threatening them with violence if they didn't pay up or comply. Jennifer was lucky to escape unharmed, but others had not been as fortunate. Dave had managed to manipulate several individuals into paying large sums of money using threats and intimidation. He was eventually arrested, but Jennifer's brush with a Craigslist hitman left her shaken for years. The Craigslist camping trip gone wrong. In 2016, a man named Alex and his two friends were looking for a cheap weekend getaway and found a Craigslist ad offering a rustic cabin for rent deep in the woods. The pictures showed a charming, isolated cabin, perfect for a few days of relaxation and fishing. The price was ridiculously low, and the owner claimed he just wanted good people to enjoy the space. The friends eagerly booked the cabin. When they arrived, the cabin was exactly as described, but there was no cell reception or Wi-Fi, just as advertised. They settled in for their weekend, unpacking their gear and setting up for a weekend of camping. However, on their first night, things began to feel off. They noticed movement in the woods just outside the cabin, and when they shined their flashlights, they could swear they saw figures moving between the trees. Shrugging it off as local wildlife, they went to bed. Around midnight, Alex awoke to the sound of tapping on the window. At first, he thought it was a branch, but when he got up to check, there were muddy handprints on the glass. He alerted his friends, and they quickly locked all the doors and windows, grabbing anything they could use as weapons. For the rest of the night, they heard footsteps around the cabin and occasional whispers. At dawn, they packed up their belongings and left as quickly as possible. On the way out, they stopped at a nearby gas station and mentioned their strange experience to the attendant. The attendant told them that several campers had recently reported similar experiences, and there were rumors that a group of locals had been using Craigslist to lure unsuspecting visitors to the area for reasons unknown. The friends later discovered that the Craigslist listing for the cabin had been taken down, and the property didn't belong to the man who posted the ad. The thought of what might have happened if they had stayed another night still haunts them. The Craigslist car deal turned robbery. In 2018, a man named Tim was looking for a second-hand car and found a great deal on Craigslist, a used 2010 Honda Civic for a fraction of the price he had seen elsewhere. The seller, who called himself Brian, said he was moving overseas and needed to sell the car quickly. Tim was thrilled and arranged to meet Brian in a public parking lot to inspect the car. When Tim arrived, Brian seemed friendly and professional, answering all his questions about the car. The car looked to be in excellent condition, and Brian even let Tim take it for a test drive. After agreeing on a price, Tim handed over the cash, and Brian gave him the title and keys. However, the moment Tim got back into the car and started driving home, 2 men in a van pulled up beside him, forced him off the road, and demanded he get out of the car. They were armed and threatened to shoot him if he didn't comply. Tim handed over the car and his wallet, and the men drove off with everything. It turned out that Brian had set up the entire scenario. He had scammed Tim into thinking the deal was legitimate, only to have his accomplices rob him after the sale was completed. By the time the police were involved, Brian had vanished, and the title he gave Tim was a forgery. Despite an investigation, Brian was never caught, and Tim was left without a car and out thousands of dollars. The Craigslist babysitter stalker. In 2015, a single mother named Rachel needed a babysitter for her 2 young children and decided to search Craigslist for help. She found an ad from a woman named Megan, who claimed to be a professional nanny with years of experience. Megan's references checked out, and after an interview, Rachel hired her to watch the kids while she worked late-night shifts. At first, Megan seemed great with the children, responsible and kind. But after a few weeks, Rachel noticed Megan becoming increasingly invasive. She would show up at the house unannounced, even on days she wasn't scheduled to work. Megan also began asking personal questions about Rachel's life and finances, making her uncomfortable. One evening, Rachel returned home from work to find Megan still there, sitting on the couch even though she was supposed to have left hours earlier. Megan made an excuse about wanting to check on the kids, but her presence felt unsettling. Rachel decided it was time to end their arrangement, but when she told Megan, things took a darker turn. Megan began stalking Rachel, showing up at her workplace, sending her threatening texts, and even standing outside her house at night. Rachel contacted the police, but Megan disappeared before they could arrest her. Later, Rachel found out that Megan had been using a fake name and had a history of stalking families she worked for, using Craigslist to find her victims. Rachel eventually moved to a new city, but the fear of Megan finding her again still lingers. The incident left her deeply shaken and distrustful of online platforms for finding childcare. The Craigslist date that turned deadly. In 2014, a woman named Emily decided to try online dating and came across a personal ad on Craigslist from a man named Mark. He seemed charming and respectful in his messages, so after exchanging a few emails, they arranged to meet for coffee. The first date went well, and Emily found herself attracted to Mark's easygoing personality and sense of humor. Over the next few weeks, they continued to see each other, and Mark seemed like the perfect gentleman. However, Emily noticed some red flags. He was overly possessive, constantly texting her, and demanding to know where she was at all times. One night, after Emily ignored his calls, Mark showed up at her apartment unannounced. Though shaken by his behavior, Emily dismissed it as a one-time incident. But things escalated quickly. Mark began following Emily to work, showing up at her friends' houses, and confronting her when she didn't answer his texts. Realizing that Mark was becoming increasingly unstable, Emily broke off the relationship. Furious, Mark began stalking her relentlessly. He would send her threatening messages, leave creepy notes on her car, and even hacked into her social media accounts. Emily reported him to the police, but Mark managed to evade arrest by constantly changing his phone number and using fake identities. One night, Mark broke into Emily's apartment. Fortunately, she wasn't home, but when she returned, she found her place ransacked. A chilling note was left on her bed that read, "You can't hide from me." Emily immediately called the police, who finally managed to track Mark down. He was arrested and charged with stalking and breaking and entering. Emily later found out that Mark had a history of violence and had been using Craigslist to find victims, manipulating them into relationships before terrorizing them. Though she narrowly escaped physical harm, the psychological trauma of being stalked by Mark still haunts her to this day. The Craigslist fake concert tickets. In 2019, a group of friends from Chicago was excited to attend a major music festival that had been sold out for months. Determined not to miss out, they scored Craigslist for tickets, hoping to find a last-minute deal. They came across an ad from a man named Dave, who claimed he had 3 extra tickets because his friends couldn't make it. Dave offered the tickets at face value, and after exchanging a few texts, the friends agreed to meet him in a public place to make the exchange. When they arrived, Dave seemed friendly and genuine. He handed them the tickets, and they paid him in cash. Everything seemed fine until they arrived at the festival gates. When they handed over their tickets, the security guards scanned them and informed the group that the tickets were fake. Confused and angry, they tried to contact Dave, but his phone number had been disconnected. Realizing they had been scammed, they reported the incident to the festival staff and the police, but there was little they could do. The friends not only missed out on the festival, but were also out hundreds of dollars. They later found out that Dave had been running the same scam on Craigslist for months, selling fake tickets to concerts and events all over the city. Despite the police investigating the case, Dave was never caught. The friends learned a hard lesson about the risks of buying anything on Craigslist without verifying its legitimacy. The Craigslist pet sitter nightmare. In 2015, a young couple, Karen and Ben, was preparing to go on vacation for a week and needed someone to watch their beloved golden retriever, Max. They found a pet-sitting ad on Craigslist that seemed trustworthy. The woman, named Emily, claimed to be an experienced pet sitter who had worked with several families in the area. Her ad included glowing testimonials from previous clients, and her rates were reasonable. After a brief phone interview, Karen and Ben felt comfortable enough to hire Emily to stay at their house and care for Max while they were away. Everything seemed fine during their vacation. Emily sent regular updates, including pictures of Max playing in the yard. However, when Karen and Ben returned home, they found their house in a state of chaos. The kitchen cabinets were open, drawers were emptied, and items were missing. But the most disturbing discovery was Max himself. He was locked in a small room, shaking and scared. Karen and Ben immediately tried to contact Emily, but her phone number was disconnected. They quickly realized they had been scammed. Not only had Emily robbed their home, but she had also mistreated their dog. After filing a police report, they learned that Emily had used a fake identity. She had been posing as a pet sitter on Craigslist for months, targeting families who would be away for extended periods, stealing from them, and leaving their pets in terrible conditions. The couple was heartbroken, and although Max eventually recovered from the ordeal, the trauma of the experience lingered for years. The Craigslist House of Horrors. In 2016, Lisa, a college student, was looking for off-campus housing and found a cheap listing for a room in a large house on Craigslist. The ad was enticing: spacious room, low rent, and only 2 other roommates. The landlord, an older man named Tom, claimed he was looking for someone quiet and responsible to share the house. Lisa arranged to meet Tom and tour the place. When she arrived at the house, Tom was friendly and welcoming, but something felt off. The house was much darker and more rundown than it appeared in the pictures. Still, the rent was so cheap that Lisa was willing to overlook the red flags. Tom showed her around the house, and the other 2 supposed roommates were nowhere to be seen. He explained that they were out for the day, but Lisa noticed several locked doors that Tom refused to open. Despite her reservations, Lisa decided to move in, thinking that her first impressions might have been wrong. Within a few days, however, strange things started happening. She would hear scratching noises coming from behind the locked doors at night, and sometimes she would wake up to find her bedroom door slightly ajar, even though she had locked it before bed. Tom would make excuses whenever she asked about the other roommates, and the atmosphere in the house grew increasingly uncomfortable. One night, Lisa heard muffled screams coming from one of the locked rooms. Terrified, she called the police, who arrived and broke into the rooms. What they found was horrifying. Tom had been holding 2 women captive for months, drugging and abusing them. The so-called roommates were actually prisoners. Tom had been using Craigslist to lure unsuspecting tenants into his house, where he had complete control. Lisa had narrowly escaped becoming his next victim, and the story made national news as one of the most chilling Craigslist cases to date.